This is a 4K 60 FPS PTZR camera, and it is unlike anything I have ever seen. This is the future of streaming and content cameras. This is going to make those boring webcam shots completely and utterly obsolete. Not only does this have a massive 1/1.5 inch CMOS sensor, not only does it do crisp, beautiful 4K and 60 FPS, but it also has a 3-axis gimbal paired with scarily effective tracking software so that you can track humans, objects, and even animals. But it's so much more than that. It also has 5 times optical zoom, meaning zero loss in quality when zooming in. It has a literal rotating sensor for full 4K vertical shooting. It can be used completely wirelessly from your phone, tablet, or even PC because it has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity. And when I say wireless, I mean literally wireless, because it has an internal battery that lasts 4 to 5 hours and accepts MicroSD cards. This is the OBSBOT Tail 2, and it's going to change everything. Now, this video is sponsored by OBSBOT, and specifically they're doing a massive giveaway at the end of the video, so stick around to find out how to enter that. But I want to make it clear, being sponsored changes nothing, because you can use your eyes to look at the image this camera produces and, well, make your own decisions. I can say whatever I want, but your eyes are the final judge. Straight away, the most important thing for a camera isn't the bells and the whistles, it's the image quality. Looking on screen now, you can see I tested the Tail 2 in 2 locations for this video specifically. A classic controlled content creator office, and probably the most painful location to shoot with any camera ever, an Australian wetlands in summer at midday, meaning brutally bright and sunny overexposed skies with glare-covered lakes, but also pitch black, thick-shaded swamp trees. And all of those contrasted locations are filled with aggressive detail and aggressive swans. And shockingly, the Tail 2 performed incredibly well. Likely because the large sensor and the f1.8 means it's pretty good at handling low light conditions, and the unique 5 times optical zoom means that the interior glass on this camera actually moves, physically zooming in and out, as you can see on screen right now. I'll talk low light and color in a second, as well as everything else, but first I want to show you why optical zoom is just absolutely amazing, with my favorite example ever right here. The shot on the left is the Tail 2 at 4K 60 FPS with no zooming in camera, but I've added a 4 times digital zoom in post-production. Then on the right hand side is the Tail 2 using 5 times optical zoom on location in the camera. You can be a complete beginner and see how much detail the optical zoom retains. We can go even further as well if we wanted, literally, with another 4 times digital zoom that when combined together becomes a 12 times hybrid zoom. Now, I will say in testing, this 12 times hybrid zoom, it did struggle a little bit at long distances with huge detail and contrasted light. I mean, everyone watching this immediately looks at this and goes, that is an eastern great egret catching some fish in an Australian wetlands. But it's not crisp enough and clean enough that I would use in a literal project. However, when the subject is much closer, such as this very aggressive Australian black swan, the 12 times zoom still retains a huge amount of detail and looks great. And side note, the reason I was able to get these shots of these very aggressive swans was because I was able to set up the Tail 2 right on the edge of the lake, connect it to my phone, and then walk away and record from a relatively safe distance at full 4K directly into the SD card that was inside it. I was even controlling the zooming and everything from my phone. It was awesome. Okay, let's talk color and lighting. In my office, when I turned off all of my lights and tested it at 4K 60 FPS, which means 1/120th shutter, of course, I will say it did max out at 3200 ISO, which wasn't enough to light myself properly. However, when I turned on my 2800 lumen newer light to 27%, the Tail 2 was able to expose me at 2100 ISO, even with that 1/120th shutter speed. Now, obviously, you'd light yourself far better than this in real life, but pushing these cameras in such a low light environment lets us see the digital noise from increasing the ISO, and honestly, I'm kind of impressed, specifically with how these cameras handle grain and artifacting. You see, the Tail 2 I know has a lot of behind the scenes work done to purely remove digital noise, such as a dual native ISO, meaning it has 2 base or native ISOs, one high and one low, which, if you don't understand what that means, essentially a native or base ISO is when there is the least digital noise. That said, the Tail 2 is sharp, and I'm talking very sharp, and because of that sensor, the f1.8, and the real optical zoom, you can actually get real camera depth out of it. If you look at this 2x and 4x shot, you can see the squirtle blurs out nicely in my background. But like all cameras, when it's fully wide angle, there isn't much depth to it, of course. So the image quality is there, but what about this absolutely nuts tracking software and of course covering the giveaway? Well, we will do that very soon, but first, before we move on from image, I want to show you two shots again. Both are 4K, both heavily mixed lighting set to auto expose in camera, but the one on the left has HDR turned on, which is why the underside of the swan and these ducks in the background are actually visible, compared to the shot on the right, which of course HDR is turned off, and that is why it is so dark and you lose so much of the detail. It's really rare that HDR impresses me, but when it comes to cameras that are physically moving to track subjects, it means you will likely have inconsistent lighting, so HDR like this is a must. So let's talk tracking. This is of course a PTZR camera, meaning it is a panning, tilting, zooming, and rotating camera, which it uses all of that flexibility, then combines it with some really powerful tracking software to give you nearly 360 degrees of tracking. And of course, 5x optical and 12x hybrid helps here to keep your subject in frame even more so. Even if it's a person, an object, or in my case, wagtails, magpies, ducks, and very aggressive swans. I tested it in mixed lighting by moving between and around trees, and even when it lost me, it quickly picked me back up again on the other side of the tree. And if you look at my screen recording on my phone, you can see I am just drawing a box around myself or my subject, and it starts the track. I can even quickly draw a different box and it swaps the track to that object smoothly. This works for single person tracking and is actually really good at just locking in to one person using their me tracking feature, but it does also have group tracking if you have friends, unlike me. Anyway, one of the best parts of this though is this has a vertical shooting mode, which is pretty normal these days. Most new webcams have this built in, except most webcams crop in on their 4K or large sensors, meaning you lose quality when you switch to the vertical portrait mode. This camera, however, doesn't do that. It literally rotates the fucking sensor. I'm sorry for swearing, but that is insanity to me. It is a camera that is automatically rotating its sensor to give you full 4K in vertical shooting. And it still has all of the same tracking features, just now in vertical. That is amazing. It's amazing for TikTokers, it's amazing for YouTube Shorts, it's amazing for streamers who want some more room at the top and the bottom, and it's just amazing in general. It is an utterly baffling engineering feat. But let's talk about software. Of course, it has all the normal things you'd expect, such as full manual exposure, except actually I couldn't figure out how to change the tail to f-stop. I don't think you can control that, but you can control pretty much everything else. The software was fine, although I will say the UI on my phone was a little bit finicky. You had to kind of pick what you were doing at one stage, such as changing the exposure, or if you wanted to then change your tracking, you'd have to close your exposure, open your tracking, and you couldn't zoom in unless you were inside the actual control sec. It was a little bit finicky, but I'm used to it now. And on the topic of it could be better, I want to talk a little bit about autofocus. The autofocus is very powerful, but I did find out in the wetlands, the autofocus did struggle a bit in heavy mixed lighting, which makes sense. Autofocus will tend to struggle in those environments. The only time the Tail 2 struggled in a controlled environment was when I went from full wide to 5x optical zoom. I think the minimum focus distance shifted backwards a little bit, which meant I also had to move back a little bit, just by a few centimeters, so that it could lock onto my face again. Otherwise, it did this little jitter. Now, something I did really struggle with, however, was the phone and to a lesser extent, the PC software's manual focus. I know this isn't designed for manual focus, this camera. It's not really supposed to be used as a manual focus camera. But if you did want to, I don't think you could. On the phone app, there is a dial that controls the focus depth that you can't spin in a full rotation because it's just not responsive enough. So I couldn't actually push the focus to the background, to the foreground in a clean, nice way. It kept stopping quite often, and every time it stopped, it hard shifted to that spot, which looked rough and just wasn't smooth. Again, because it is a PTZR camera, you probably aren't going to use that as manual focus very often, but I do hope OBSBOT keeps working on this, especially the software side of things, so I could manually focus pull smoothly or just easier. If they did that, I'd be over the moon. In the meantime, though, I just leave the autofocus on, which again, it's amazing. And if I did have any problems, I could just tap the screen or click my subject in the software to push that autofocus back to where I wanted it to be. Now that said, I loved the presets feature. This is probably my favorite feature of the entire software. I was sat on the edge of the lake for a really long time, and I kind of figured out where the different birds were landing and where they were hanging out. So what I did was I used the phone software to move the camera, change the different zoom lengths and shot sizes, placed it where I wanted it to, and then I set that as a preset. So then I could just tap between the different preset buttons to pivot the camera from those shots. I did find myself using this more than the actual gimbal controls because those were just a little too tricky for me, especially when zoomed in. Obviously, when you're zoomed in and you tell the camera to look a little bit to the left, it's a lot more left than you would think. That said, after a few weeks practice, it got a lot easier, mostly because I figured out that if I set the pan and tilt adjustments at a wide angle and then zoomed in, it was far easier. Let's do that giveaway, but first, I just want to quickly say the connectivity on this camera, it's awesome. Not only can it be connected via Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, as I said, but it also has professional options such as NDI, RTMP, or more. And then on the back, we have USB-C for wall power to charge the internal battery, USB-C for PC connection, HDMI out for capture cards, Ethernet, SDI, both a microphone in and line in port, which I will say the camera doesn't have a built-in microphone, which won't bother many because this kind of camera, you would be using it with a professional microphone or a wireless lapel. But either way, I hope that even though this is just me filming birds like a nerd, you can understand how amazing this camera is and how it can completely change streaming. Imagine placing a wireless tracking camera like this in your stream room, kitchen, gym, theater stage, event space, or in your IRL streaming backpack, hotspotting it to your PC, phone, laptop, or tablet in seconds and streaming whatever content you want. Now, if you want to go in the draw to win one of my favorite webcams ever, the Meet 2 4K, then comment down below the answer to this question. What does PTZR stand for and the code word Eastern Great Egret? I'll let the winner know in a week or two. I'll see you guys next week, and shout out to the commenters who asked me to review this camera a few weeks ago. I love it.